Ever feel like an alien floating in space, looking at the world from some arbitrary, detached nowhere? This is the Galilean cosmology of modern science, and it's fundamentally alienating. We have traded a deeply integrated medieval hierarchy for a flat world built on propositional tyranny and postmodern psyops. In this video, we are breaking down how modern education replaced true formation with indoctrination, all to help us avoid the weight of reality. That's right, we're diving into a dialogue between Mary Harrington and Harrington-Pageau to reveal why the Dark Ages were actually about a loss of the need for technology, not knowledge, and why icons offer spiritual depth that memes can never reach. It is time to stop pretending we can stand nowhere and start participating in the created order again. Let's get into the math.
Hello and welcome to Socrates Dialogues. I'm Mary Harrington, and I'm very honoured to be joined today by Harrington-Pageau, an icon carver, a very noted artist, a remarkable thinker on a great many topics, and host of the Symbolic World blog and podcast. Welcome, Jonathan, and thank you for coming.
It's great to see you, Mary.
So, Jonathan, if I may, can we start with how you came to do what you do?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm sure there are people out there in the world who would say icon carver. Isn't that something from the Middle Ages? How do you come to be doing this now? And furthermore, how do you come to be doing this in such a potently digitally mediated way? Now, is your background, your personal background is not Greek Orthodox, is it? So how did you come to your creative practice, and how did you come to the faith which inspires it?
Yeah, I mean, those are definitely quite related. I studied in fine art, but I was always interested in thought. I read a lot of philosophy and then ultimately theology. I grew up as a Christian, but in a Protestant setting. And, like many people in their 20s, a lot of questions and a lot of readings that weren't the same readings that you were doing when you were younger, and a lot of challenges. In terms of long story short, I ended up falling in love with medieval thinking and also medieval cosmology, the way that they understood how the world existed. And I spent many years with my brother as well. We spent a few decades trying to be able to reconcile the medieval thinking with the modern world. And so for me, the blog, the podcast, the things that I do in terms of speaking and of writing and the carving are completely integrated. That is, the way also to understand, let's say, medieval thinking or the medieval vision is everything also has to be embodied. It's not just something that happens in the mind, and so there has to be practice. And so therefore, obviously becoming Orthodox, moving into a more integrated worldview in terms of liturgy and in terms of that life, and then also the artwork being a kind of embodiment of what I think. So all of that goes together. The ideas and the practice, to me, are just two faces of the same problem that I was trying to deal with.
Mm-hmm. I wondered, can you say a little more about the medieval cosmology which brought you to this practice? I mean, I'm familiar with C.S. Lewis's The Discarded Image, which I'm sure you know, where he does his best to set out a sketch account of that cosmology in this sort of synthetic world. But I wondered if you could say a little bit more.
Yeah, well, there really is. We talk about the great medieval synthesis in the sense that often many people have this idea of the Dark Ages and that the Middle Ages were this very intellectually and culturally poor place, but rather, I think it's best to understand that there was an integration between the religious practice, the philosophy, the political world. Everything had its place, but everything was integrated ultimately in a giant world vision.
Wow, this is so interesting. I don't like the word cosmology, but I understand what they're getting at. And when Jonathan says everything had its place, that's really key. This place. What was the place, though? The place is hierarchy. things were done in a hierarchy, and it's not that you didn't or couldn't move in the hierarchy. That happened all the time in medieval times, right? It's that you wouldn't want to, right? Unless you were special or stand out or didn't fit in, which is a very different attitude from today. This is, I think, what we're actually missing more than anything else, more than like the way the medieval people saw the world. Okay, but also they understood where they belonged. That's why a lot of last names, my own last name included, is a profession, right? Lefebvre or Lefebvre means smith, as in blacksmith. We knew our place. We had a thing that was handed down that we knew how to do, and we carried that with us from our birth onward, because we knew at what stratum of society. This is also why people changed names back then, because the first name and the last name that you gave, particularly you can see this with immigration into the United States in the records, from the 18 and early 1900s, changed sometimes because people were trying to get away from that place, for whatever reason that they had in the old world, right, and come to the new world, which is also not how we talk about things anymore. So it wasn't that long ago that this sense of hierarchy was lost, which makes things make a lot more sense, because you try to go back to the Middle Ages and say, well, something after the Middle Ages, or at the end of the Middle Ages, or the thing that ended the Middle Ages was the thing that's causing it. The timelines don't slide incorrectly, because you have to understand there's many patterns unfolding on different timelines because of momentum, right? They're operating at different layers of hierarchy, whether we want to acknowledge that hierarchy or not, it's still actually there, and that has different momentum associated with it, right? The higher up you are, the slower things change. And we've only lost that within a few generations here, maybe 3, something on that order, not 10. We lost other things 10 generations ago, maybe. But I think that's what's really missing. And I think we're going to find through this conversation that that idea of the depth of hierarchy being the thing that holds things together is very important. And the Dark Ages idea is always tricky. I've talked about this before. It's the Dark Ages because the not Dark Ages are when we gained or regained, to be more precise, a bunch of knowledge or access to books, effectively, that we didn't have before. And some of that is that we lost the books, effectively, right? We had to get them back from basically the Muslim scholars, but hardly all of it. It's not like Aristotle was unknown in Europe or something. But I think it's more fundamentally important, right? The Dark Ages are dark because there's a lot of death and there's a lot of civilizational collapse. So you have the end of the Roman Empire. You know, some of that is due to plagues, by the way, and then you have the Black Death, right? So we've got more plagues, and the reason why you lose technologies like concrete is not because you lost the formula for concrete necessarily. It's because you don't need it. What good's a formula for something you don't need? So that's why the Dark Ages are dark. It's not strictly that we lost the technology or lost the craftsmanship. In some cases we did, but not in all cases. It's not like we lost all the books. In some cases we did, but not in all cases. But what we did lose was the need for these things. We lost a large enough population to require a technological sophistication that Rome had. It's that simple. And once you think of the Dark Ages that way, it makes way more sense. And it makes sense why they call it the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment is all wrapped up in the printing press and the age of gnosis and the idea that knowledge as propositions is the highest value. Now, whether or not that's an appropriate interpretation is up for debate. You say, no, the Enlightenment is because medical technology had advanced, and we were no longer living in the age of death. And that shows up in the artwork. This is not that far out there. But the other interpretation is, we've got enlightened by ideas. Now, I actually think that's probably just a psyop propaganda science campaign, actually. And we can debate that, because I'm not sure that would be easy to dig out. But I have heard other interpretations, as in, that there's just not as much death around, or, well, it wasn't the flourishing of the technology that brings us out of the Dark Ages. It's the flourishing of the civilization that requires that technology. That's not a subtle difference, right? It tells you which comes first and which has primacy, right? The need for the technology has primacy over the technology. Having a technology you don't need doesn't do you any good, right? And so you won't maintain it. And by maintain, I don't just mean the stuff you have, but also the skills to build it going forward. So that, I think, is a much more helpful way to understand Dark Ages versus Enlightenment. And I know in the flat worldview, he's absolutely right. There's, this Dark Ages talk is crazy, only if you define it incorrectly. But there's several ways to define it that I think are just super helpful. So I just wanted to make that clear. This idea of their, quote, cosmology, I don't think the cosmology changed that much. I think what changed was the centering of perspective, right? When you center the perspective middle out from the person, from the, quote, individual, which is an impossible thing, out to the world, you privilege this idea of the person, and then you negate the primacy of the person by saying that the Earth goes around the sun and the sun is the center of the world, instead of the person being the center of the world, even though your perspective is from the person out all of a sudden, right? And you're just pretending like you have knowledge outside of your own sphere by saying the Earth goes around the sun. How would you know that? There's no way to tell that as a single human being on the planet. It's impossible. And it's super important, actually. I think it's more about that, which flattens hierarchy as well. Now, it's the flattening of the hierarchy that does the most damage. Because if your perspective, your personal private perspective, is put in a box, and that box is, you are a blacksmith from a family of blacksmiths within this stratum of the hierarchy, the fact that you then also see the world from your perspective out, not such a big deal. But if you flatten the world and there's no more hierarchy, the fact that you have a cosmos is probably irrelevant. In other words, any cosmology you use without hierarchy is not going to work well. And I think actually that would be a better thing to focus on. They don't get into that here. I wish they would. I mean, these people use hierarchy a lot, and they seem to be missing, how deep the hierarchy is and how important it is, and how all by itself it solves a bunch of problems. Like these other issues around the narcissistic individualism, or the personal private perspective preferring psychological frame, or this idea of politics, which is more than anything else kind of an almost a fake stratum of class or something. That all goes away, right? We don't have influencers because Hollywood and entertainment's a big deal. Like all of that can be dispensed with just by adding hierarchy back into the equation. So that's why I prefer to talk about it that way. But let's see which way they go.
And that world vision had to do with the notion of the heavens and how they understood the earth. If you read Dante, you get a sense of what that worldview is. Mm-hmm. Now, one of the problems that happened.
Okay, so the thing they're not mentioning about Dante, it's a whole bunch of circles of hell. In other words, hierarchies of badness. Those are just the ones that are the bad hierarchies, I'll say, or the hierarchy within the badness. What about the other hierarchies? The ones going up, right? It's a deep, deep, deep hierarchy. And that's super important. And all the hints are there, right? All the data is there to derive this. We're just not doing it. We're not doing the math. We're skipping over it.
Is that because of scientific development and because of the scientific thought, that worldview seemed to have been eclipsed by modern cosmology and modern thinking. But what that does is it leaves the person alienated. People don't realize that, in fact, Galilean cosmology is an alienating cosmology, because in order to conceive of it, you have to imagine yourself as an alien floating in space, looking at a cosmos from some arbitrary place in the world. Whereas the medieval cosmology understood the Earth as being the center, as the place of being. And so, I mean, one of the things we're doing, and
Okay, so see, now this is very good, and also leaves out a bunch of stuff. Yes, there's a hierarchy there, right? Like if you just have the word hierarchy, there's a hierarchy there, right? And what is this space that you have to judge the world to say that the Earth goes around the sun? Well, it's a space that you can't inhabit, and I would argue that the thing that science absolutely must rely on, in the absence of, we'll say, its proper place within religion, right, or underneath religion, as the handmaiden, if you will, of religion. Without that, you have to have a space from which to judge the world, and that space, I believe, I have said this before, is called objective material reality. That's the most accurate and precise description of where it is they're, quote, standing when they make these judgments about how the world works. Well, the problem is, to Jonathan's point here, if that's where you're standing, you've alienated yourself from the integrated whole of the cosmos, because you're able to take multiple sort of perspectives, whichever one suits your needs in the moment, right? Is the sun also going around a black hole at the center of the galaxy? And where is that in relate, right? And then, well, are galaxies also moving? What are these trajectories? You've probably seen the corkscrew spiral nonsense that they put together, right? Well, that perspective, in a sense, doesn't exist, right? You can say, no, well, Mark, I'm sure there's some perspective somewhere where it does exactly look like that. I was like, well, maybe, but you can't prove that. You can infer it. I get that, but inference isn't proof. That's why they're different words. I seem to have to say that a lot lately. They're different words. You can infer that this must exist. The problem is you have to elevate that over all the other perspectives that don't show exactly that corkscrew, or don't show a corkscrew at all, like the one we typically use for the solar system, where it's just really the sun's stationary and everything's moving around it. And then the question is, why privilege that over the one where the Earth is still and everything's moving around that, right? And there is an answer for that, right? And it's not rockets. It's not rockets. It has nothing to do with rockets. It's actually just, I can do the math easier the other way around. That's actually all it is. It just makes the math simpler, which is fine for predictions and for things like that. But then you've got things like the Antikythera machine, which it looks like they could predict whole eclipses with it. Didn't really need all that math, now did you? Not really. You could just do it mechanically with regular old geometry, and it just worked out. And so your, quote, world view, or cosmology is what they're calling it here, actually doesn't matter, because you can simulate it using either model, even without math. So why are we making the math easy? And I'm not saying we shouldn't. I'm saying, why are you privileging, say, the corkscrew over the sun at the center of the solar system, right? Like over having the Earth at the center. Why are you doing that? And who are you to do that? Well, you have to stand somewhere. Oh, it's objective material reality. Right. This is what gives them the justification to speak as authorities about things. And the problem is that when you get into philosophy, which, by the way, is an invalid category the way they're using it, but whatever. When you get into philosophy, what you don't have a justification for standing nowhere. And by the way, you're standing nowhere. And so you very quickly run into these problems of your claims can't be validated. Ooh. So is philosophy like science or not? And obviously, what they're doing is not like science. It's not independent validation at all. It's not, formally written down with experiments and testable hypotheses and ideas. That's not what they're doing when they talk about philosophy. Right? However, Plato and Aristotle stuff is all justified that way. How interesting.
It's not just, in some ways, there are movements before the symbolic world. If I think that's what phenomenology was trying to do to some extent. I think Heidegger was always also trying to kind of bring us back. C.S. Lewis is an example of people trying to bring us back and say, no, your experience of the world is the first one. The phenomenological experience, this experience of standing in the world and watching the sunrise, and that's true. That's the most true. When someone says, the sun rising in the morning is an illusion because the earth is turning, and they give you this mechanical explanation. That is very dangerous to your mental stability.
That's right. Owen Barfield, who was a contemporary and a great friend of C.S. Lewis, he flips that entire sense of alienation that you describe on his head, doesn't he, in Saving the Appearances.
That's right.
His argument is that this supposedly detached perspective from which moderns have been taught to view the world is itself the idolatry.
Yeah.
It's a very back to front way of thinking about it from the point of view of somebody educated to take the scientific world as and pun intended gospel.
Yeah.
Well, and again, that's the problem, right? The scientific world has to stand somewhere to make its judgments, and so it stands in this thing called objective material reality, which doesn't exist, and then it makes judgments, and then it gets into the business of making judgments about things. But actually, if you just back out Immanuel Kant and you don't say that philosophy should not be the handmaiden of religion, then this problem goes away immediately, right? Because science falls back under religion, along with all the other quote philosophies, and then this problem vanishes. It's gone. It doesn't occur. But it's also interesting to ask, well, why do we have this quote modern worldview? Like, where is that coming from? And that's not universal. Like, these are the people that, when I was younger, were made fun of. Oh, he thinks that the sun rises. The sun doesn't rise. Everybody knows that, right? Oh, he grew up in the Midwest, or he grew up in the South on a plantation, or whatever. I mean, this is real stuff you really heard for real, not too long ago, right? Within my lifetime, and I was always like, well, I don't know, man. I mean, what's your experience, right? So why are we not privileging our embodied experience anymore? Well, that's the result of so-called education. This is why I don't like education. I think no, and then people, oh, but we've turned education into indoctrination. I'm like, you'd have to give me a definition of education that wasn't always indoctrination. And then maybe you can do that, something like that. But then you've got to say where and when it changed and why and how, and you're not going to be able to do that. Because I've asked a bunch of people and none of them can do it, and they're all really smart. So I don't think I'm going to run into anybody that can actually do that. I think we have a fundamental misunderstanding of what's missing here, which is formation, right? Because then whatever teaching you get in whatever school, it doesn't have the super negative impact that it does now, right? If you're formed and your teacher says, climate change is real, and you say, no, it's not, it doesn't, you don't get indoctrinated. It's that simple, right? If you have something in that space, the education system can't fill it with something else. It's already full. Oh, well, that makes it easy to fix education now, doesn't it? Right. We've already taken those steps. Like, first, no federal education. Second, get rid of the standards. They're no good, right? And when you don't hold up mere literacy as a high value in your society, it turns out that you're not going to run into this problem, because literacy is very much based on this propositional set of ideas about how this stuff is supposed to work, not how it works, how it's supposed to work. And that's where the problem comes in. You're supposed to be able to think about all these perspectives from objective material reality that I put in your head. No, no. Maybe I'm supposed to be able to, under certain circumstances, embody an abstract enough way of thinking that I can do problems and reason about problems in my head. But I'd better first have a basis, a grounding, if you will, in the world in which I live and participate on a daily basis. How's that? And then maybe we can build into something abstract like algebra, right? And the ancient Greeks understood this problem. Plato and Aristotle were pretty clear. If you don't wrestle, you're not a philosopher. You're a sophist. Ooh, that's not good, right? It seems like they had it right. And what's the difference? The difference is, what did we reduce or eliminate from schools over the past 40 years or so? Well, that's easy. We cut down on recess. We removed gym, music, and art. There you go. Problem solved. That's why we're privileging it. We're privileging this, quote, scientific worldview because of that. Because we're privileging literacy. Over literacy is the highest value, and science is the most refined form. Well, everybody wants to do the scientific thinking thing. It's just bad for us.
And yet he makes the case persuasively that there's an evolution in consciousness all the way up to the modern era, and in his view, we're heading through this age of detachment from participation back towards a return to it.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you'd understand your work and the movement of which you're part as an element in that.
Yeah, it is.
I would say that's not evolution. It's not a change in thought. It's just a change in how you are privileging things in the world. If you're privileging propositions about objects in the world, you're going to get this bad result. That bad result's going to continue indefinitely. Now, it's fair to make a point that, well, things are returning in some sense from, we'll say, where they were, right, which is this integrated cosmological worldview of the medieval time period, or the, quote, Dark Ages. I think that actually that's fair, right, that things have changed. But you can't get too far from it, because you require the ability to integrate what we call the poetic way of informing the world, right, which is how you understand symbolism and symbols. You can't do away with, you can't just say, well, we're just going to privilege this and ignore that. It doesn't work. And so there is a, quote, return, kind of. I think the problem is a lot of things look like they're a return. And if you assume, well, the only reason people would go back to symbolism is because, you know, there's an evolution, a cyclical evolutionary attempt or something, then what's going to happen is you're going to live in a strange world. You're going to live in a strange world with strange problems. And that, I think, is what's happening. We're living in a strange world with strange problems at the end of the day. And it's a bigger problem than you might think, because a lot of people are going back just because they're running out of options, right? You listen to somebody like Wolfgang Smith, and he, you know, did the science thing, did the philosophy thing, and then ended up going to the Catholic Church. And I don't think his sense of symbolism got revived. He's not talking that way. When you hear him talk, he talks about, oh, well, science didn't work and philosophy didn't work, so I gave up and I just went to church because that was the only thing left. Okay, it's not a bad thing, right? But thinking that this is an indication of a cyclical thing, that everyone's just going to return, and you know, it takes people out of the equation. Well, then what are we talking about? How much more work do we have to do? None? Is it none? Right. That's the problem. Or is it just, we'll set up symbolic world, and no, I don't think that's sufficient. I think it's good. I think it's better, but I don't think it's sufficient by any means, right? That's more the issue for me. And these thinkers, they make great hay about Owen Barfield and Heidegger and C.S. Lewis, and I'm just going to break this down in a simple way. If that had worked, we wouldn't be here now. Those guys are all dead. Whatever they were trying to do failed. Not that they were wrong, but having that doesn't convey anything to us culturally at all, period. Heidegger's made everything worse because his ideas are dumb. So, that's pretty easy. C.S. Lewis has been around a long time. Everybody knows the Lord of the Rings. I don't know. These should be very large hints about effectiveness, but I guess not.
That's exactly what it is that I'm doing. And I think there are other people that are doing similar things. Even Jordan Peterson, we were talking about Martin Shaw earlier in the early conversation. All of these people are people, because you can feel it. If you know, like the flat earth kind of movement, you can feel that there's an uneasiness. Whereas, people that are kind of flat earthers or have this type of thinking, they feel the uneasiness of the world. They sense that it's deracinated, that they're thrown into this insane cosmology, but they're so attached to a kind of physicalism and a materialist way of understanding the world that they cause chaos also in their understanding. They also create a world that's not possible. And so how can we see the phenomenological world and this kind of standing in the world and facing the world as it comes to us as being primary, and then understanding that the scientific descriptions are technically true and are useful, thinking more.
Yeah, see, so close and yet so far away. Hierarchy fixes this. One of the problems with this outline is that if you pay really close attention, the thesis here is still about information and changing the information and the thought patterns of people that aren't you. All right, so that's not going to happen, right? That's not the way things work. And there is a point to, well, if you were trained with the physicalist reductionist worldview, and fair enough, like that could have happened to you, or if you were indoctrinated into it, or whatever, psyop, however you want to frame it, it doesn't really matter. Then you're going to try to be living in a world, not you're going to create a world. You're going to try to be living in a world that operates the way you expect. And part of it is the way you expect. That's the individualism problem, which I've talked about in numerous other videos. I'll link one of them here for you. That's more the issue there, just flat out. And then when you think about that, when you engage with that, everything kind of changes, because some people are not going to ever, under any circumstances, no matter what else you change, going to be able to understand the world any differently. Like, it's just not going to be an option for them. How many of those people there are, I do not know. I do not think anybody else knows either. So if they assume it's a small number or a number that doesn't matter, immediately be suspicious, because I'm sure that it's neither of those. Right? I'm sure it's a significant enough number that we need to figure out what to do about that. And again, that's not a problem. You can live in a physicalist world as long as you're not trying to be a priest, as long as you're not trying to be a beautiful artist, as long as you're maybe trapped in the ivory tower where you can't hurt anybody, doing good, pure science. Well, that's fine. I want all the physical reductionists to have a place. I just don't want them to be able to be any place or go any place or do any sort of thing. Which is true of every, I'm not going to be a basketball player, guys. It's not happening, right? And I'm okay with that, although I really enjoy basketball. I'm just not tall enough. It's that cognitively we must have similar, although I would argue much greater variation. And so there's going to be a big world that your brain isn't going to be able to do cognitively for whatever reason. It's okay, but This is what we're not accounting for in these worldviews. We're thinking like, oh, we can just change somebody's thinking so that they aren't no longer a physicalist reductionist or a quote materialist or whatever. I don't think that's true. I mean, I think it's true for some people. I mean, I'm very much a fan of the theory that if you train people incorrectly when they're young, in particular, if you give them exposure to the wrong sorts of things, see Dale Farron's work, then their brain's going to get full of those things and not better things. I'm a fan of that. That doesn't mean once it's done, it can be undone, though. That's part of the problem. You're just assuming it can be undone. Maybe not, but maybe then we need to focus on formation of children and let whatever's going to play out, play out. I don't think so, by the way. Sorry. We have practices. We think we can fix this problem well enough, right? Not get them to think differently about the world. I don't need them to think differently about the world, right? I only need them to participate in the world instead of thinking about the world and the modes of participation, which is really what we're talking about. Are you abstracting yourself from the world? Are you sitting in objective material reality and then making proclamations propositionally about the world? That I can fix, I think. We've been doing it. Seems to work pretty well. There's no solution to what Jonathan's proposing. There's an implication that you can educate them into it or something, but I don't think so.
And in terms of Galilean, it's a cosmology is useful if you need to fly satellites, right? But it's not useful if you have to set your day and you have to kind of decide what it is, when it is you're going to go take a walk and when it is you're going to sleep. Those are more related to just the same perspective that the medieval person or someone 100,000 years ago or 10,000 years ago existed. So I think that's what we're trying to do. And so you can take that basic kind of cosmological perspective and then realize that the same work now has to be done for everything that the ancient religious world had to offer, which is that it is possible to live inside the religious narrative, to live inside the Christian story. It is possible to understand the biblical stories, to live in them, and to not see them through this kind of cynical materialist lens, but rather reintegrate them into our world, in a more subtle way. Maybe that's a way of thinking about it.
Well, again, it's so close yet so far away. All of that is probably true. The point that probably didn't come out is the number of people that need to be able to do the things and think about the world in the way that allows for satellites is a small number of people. It's marginal. They're the margin. Science is the margin. These materialist ways of thinking about the world are marginal. They're the margin. I don't know why Jonathan won't come out and say it. He's the margins guy. Like, they're the margin guys. Everybody needs to be able to set their day, but almost nobody needs to deal with satellites at any layer that would require specialized training, right? And you can argue like, well, you're dealing with some GPS satellite technology. I don't need any training for that or any kind of thinking. I can just look at the map and go, oh, okay. Like I don't need to know any of the math or anything. It's beautiful. Thank goodness I can't do math to save my soul. So lucky me. You also don't need to do math to do computers. I've successfully programmed computers for decades. No math. Terrible at math. Computers are great at math, by the way. And if you know how to put the math into the computer, you don't need to do math for yourself ever. It's great. I love computers. That's partly why. You know what? Not a problem. So that marginal way of thinking needs to be accounted for. What we're not doing is accounting for that. Okay, maybe these people need to exist and they can be made useful. Sure, that's what academia used to do. If we could go back to that, that would be fine. No one's proposing any answers here. And I don't think that you need to change much, right? I think you just add hierarchy and say, this is what the hierarchy looks like, and this is where you belong, and there you go. Right? But we're not there. And I don't think it's this physicalist reductionist or this materialist move What's your definition of materialism? Mine's here, so you can check that out. I think it's super important. And I don't think it's necessarily this outline. It's the selfishness. It's the selfishness. It's not that we're not integrated. It's that we're trying to disintegrate because we want the judgment from the objective material reality. So we're removing ourselves from having to have created order enforced upon us. And that's super unhealthy. And that, I think, that's the individualism. That, I think, is a healthier way to think about it.
But still seeing them as primary, that's also the thing. To say, I can totally believe in all the scientific advancement, but still see the story of Genesis 1 and the story of the creation narrative as being more full of truth and meaning than a Big Bang Theory. Even though I have no problem with the Big Bang Theory per se, it's just that the Big Bang Theory doesn't tell you how to live. The Big Bang Theory doesn't give you a sense of what's important. And a creation narrative or an origin that tells you what it is that's important and leads you in a direction, gives you a moral compass, is far more inclusive and more true than one that doesn't.
Yeah, I suppose
Yeah, I just want to point out, he did use the magic word primary, right? All you really have to do to fix materialism is switch what is primary from the physical to the ethereal or spiritual. That's it. What's primary? Well, primary are the things that move the world. Well, none of the things that move the world are material. None of them. Material doesn't move the world. The world moves as the result of material, but something moves the material. And whether that's a quote person or a supernatural, which is the correct scientific term, force, or God, it really doesn't matter, right? But the moving is the moving of my hand is not being done by the material of my hand. The material is the thing that I am making move. It's backwards causality. If you want to think of it in terms of single causality, there's obviously not single causality. Aristotle had 4 for a reason.
Another cut at the same challenge might be, and I think this is a thought that I've had on a number of occasions, that the Big Bang Theory is one way of saying, and God said, let there be light.
Yeah.
And God said, let there be light is another way of telling the story of the Big Bang Theory. But what's the critical difference in both of those cases is where that account takes you next.
Yeah.
Well, I think the critical difference is the Big Bang Theory is a secular version that leaves out the creation. And the reason why I say that is because they are constantly announcing that they have wound back some ridiculously small measure, picoseconds, nanoseconds, I don't know, something insane of what happened directly after the Big Bang. As if that would, like, even scientifically, that's not relevant to anything ever and can't be. But they're constantly trying to do that. Oh, we have a new theory, but why would any of that matter to anybody at all ever under any circumstances? And the answer is it can't. So why are they doing that? So is it the same? No, I don't think it is. I think that they're struggling to take over the myth that, let there be light, right? I mean, they're trying to take the whole kit and caboodle, because the Big Bang Theory has a thesis for when light happens, like at what time frame or whatever. I just don't think it mattered. Like, why do you need to describe that scientifically? It doesn't do you any good scientifically, and it doesn't do you any good not scientifically. It just doesn't do you any good. It's just pure fantasy speculation for the sake of making yourself feel like you know something, which you don't, by the way, and you wouldn't, even if you had the information and a formula that could derive the validness of that information mathematically. I mean, nothing's changed except you've wasted an awful lot of time on something that can't help you, but can waste your time. So it definitely hurt you. So it's not a mere replace. You can't just swap it out. These aren't equal. Like, they're talking, well, these are two equal things, and really, no, they're not even close to equal. One has a relevant explanation that's useful for your participation in the created order into which you were born, and the other has absolutely no utility whatsoever, because it's a hand wave to say, don't worry about what came before, just proceed from this middle point, which is fine. Science proceeds from a middle point. That's Jordan Peterson talks about this.
Yeah. So the meaning of what it is, an origin is, and how in some ways it lays a pattern for the future. It kind of sets it up in a seed form, and then it unfurls. That is something that we need to understand at a human level as well. Origins in terms of stories, they set a hierarchy of values or a hierarchy of purposes. Even in even in like a fictional narrative, you know that the origin sets up this hierarchy of purposes, and then the story unfolds. And so without that, then we don't understand that a story of an origin is a story by which you get your bearings.
That's right.
And so the Big Bang theory it's nothing. It's just like it's like if you ask me, if I asked you, where does Michelangelo's David statue, what's the origin of it? And you said, oh, it's that quarry here in this city, and this is where Michelangelo's statue comes from. And it's like, well, you're not answering my question by giving me a technical description of where something comes from. Because it's something that has meaning and that is providing meaning to me, and I have to encounter with meaning, then you have to give me a meaning answer to my question. And the idea that we don't think that about all of human existence is ridiculous, because we are meaning creatures. We are creatures that exist in meaning and this hierarchy of values.
That's
Yeah. So this is the flat world stuff, right? When you're reducing things to descriptions, to explanations, and all of which are just merely composed of propositions, ultimately. That's that propositional tyranny that Dr. John Vervaeke talks about right there, right? It's definitely one way of looking at it, but that's the flat world. But why is the world flat? Well, the world is flat because, and I've talked about this before, like to write a good story, you start with set and setting. Why? Because that sets the frame, and the frame is the thing that gives you the pointers for the hierarchy. And I know this is going to come up later, but I'm just going to give this away. When you hit postmodernism, and the death of the author problem happens pretty quickly, you are able to set whatever frame you want to match whatever conclusion you wish. And they actually work backwards. See, I'm dyslexic, so I see it when people work backwards because I have all these systems in my head to try to not do that because I'm super dyslexic. So I see it right away when people do this. They get to the end of the story, they've already anticipated in many cases. Sometimes they've come to a conclusion at the end. That's a little rarer, but it happens. And then they go back and retrofit the context to match what they wanted the story to have said. They do it all the time. And I'm like, yeah, but those events didn't occur in that story. We're like, well, but really the author meant to. And I've heard people say this, like, oh, the author meant to put this. The author did put this in this way because this is missing and that's missing. It's like, you can't say somebody put something in by making something missing. That doesn't make any sense. Beware of people to talk like that. They're probably unhinged or manipulative in a bad way. And this is common, right? This is absolutely common. That's one of the big problems with it. Is that people do that all the time because postmodernism, which everybody tries to redeem, there's no goodness in postmodernism at all. At all. They didn't come up with anything new, interesting, or important. All the things they did were actually bad, wrong, and evil. It's not that hard. And if you think of it that way, life will get a lot clearer for you.
right. And it's another thought which I often have is that one of the things conservatives in particular get wrong about postmodernism is that they assume that because there's this whole movement which is dedicated, it's postmodernism sort of in general functions, it's a kind of obsessive critique of all narrative as such, right? The suspicion towards meta-narratives. But I've always thought that what the suspicion is a mistake, or it's a kind of hysterical response to the return of something, might be another way of saying it. But the focus on narrative is not a mistake, and it's always seemed to me that in rejecting the suspicion, or in rejecting where that critique takes takes a postmodernist.
Yeah.
Conservatives sort of throw an important baby out with the bathwater, which is the return of narrative. It's the return of exactly your area of interest, which is the symbolic dimension. And in a sense, the only thing the postmodernists get wrong is in treating that dimension as something negative or wicked, or that ought to be expunged, or as only really pointing towards power and hostility and something malign.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Mary Harrington's from the UK. There's no conservatives in the UK. Haven't been for decades now. I'm sorry. They're just let's go back to Churchill, maybe. Right? Like, it's been a while. Europe has been leftist for 120 years, 140 years, something like that. It's because of the beheading of the king, and see my history playlist video. We go through it in those videos. When you understand that, it becomes a lot more clear why they probably have never met a conservative. And fair enough, there's few enough of them in the world. I don't know where anybody gets the idea that the postmoderns were like trying to do something good. They're just trying to justify being bad people. And of course they don't like narrative that they don't control. And the only thing they correctly intuit, will say, although, I mean, everybody already knew this before them, so I don't know why you would give them any credit for this in particular. This is what, Bernays and those guys are on about, Ellul and guys like that. Controlling the narrative gives you a lot of power over the judgment of things. Oh, right, it does. And it's not that they reduced it to power. It's that they knew they were wielding power when they could control the narrative. And there's no way to redeem that and say, well, they had a point about narrative. No, they did not have a point about narrative. They didn't even have a definition of narrative. What they were doing was spinning stories that made the judgment of their behavior either neutral or good, so they didn't have to feel judged badly for bad behavior. That's really all that's going on. It's a very simple psychological thing. People have a real problem, especially, unfortunately, both of these types of people. Very sad for me to say, that sort of class of person has a real hard time understanding basic psychological, which is what they would call them, I would just call them human behavior, features do not change with IQ or perceived intelligence at all. At all. The number of biases the guy with a 200 IQ has is not different from the number of biases the guy with an 80 IQ has. That's actually in the research. If you actually read it, it's in the research, guys. Knowing about biases doesn't get rid of them. Knowing about, morality, right? Philosophers are not more moral than the average population. In fact, they're less. In the research, on the one hand, they're like, oh, academia, and then they ignore all the findings of academia at the same time. It's very annoying for me because I know how to read, and I did, and they didn't, or they did and they skipped right over their heads because they're subject to this bias. I'm not saying I'm not subject to a bias. I'm subject to all kinds of them, but a lot of training in this, a lot, and I'm sure plenty of problems, just not these. Like, I see this stuff pretty clearly. I've had discussions like this about this sort of thing my whole adult life, for real. Most of these people are coming to this 5, 6, 7, 10 years ago. It's been a lot longer than that for me. I've been down this road with the best and the brightest, in some cases, PhDs in fields. None of these conversations are new or different for me. I've talked about postmoderns before and done the research on that. There's nothing there. They stray into power because that's what they're wielding. Narrative control is a form of power. Now, we can argue that they don't have a good definition of narrative. I do. You can check out mine. And that's all well and good. And that's important, narrative, because narrative is how you couple to the world. And I have a video, I just did it with with slides that can help you understand that whole outline for how human behavior works and how humans interact. And hopefully you'll check that out at some point, maybe after you watch this.
That's mostly it. It's mostly that the postmoderns, they tend to understand or see narratives as power structures, and as narrative as an imposition of order, on the kind of uncertainty, but they wield that, right? So even though there's this kind of decentralizing, Jacques Derrida talks about, removing the logos from the center, trying to create a more friendship or equal base for things. He still believes that stories are necessary, and so much of the postmodern thinking leads to a return to a kind of revolutionary communist narrative. Like, you can't avoid it, even though people say there's no connection between postmodernism and Marxism. That's first of all, that's a lie. But then also, if you destroy the idea of a hegemonic, patriarchal or whatever narrative, then the revolutionary narrative becomes the one that you end up embracing. And one of the problems with the conservatives is that because they have.
So just to intervene here, the connection is that the postmoderns saw exactly the trick that Karl Marx was playing. Whether Karl Marx knew he was playing a trick is irrelevant, right? And used that. I have a video on this, the trick of socialism, right? The postmoderns are using the trick of socialism, which is telling you, giving you a demonstration that you don't need something like, well, you don't need the author's version of the context of this story to make sense of it. That's technically true, because you can rearrange the comprehension of a text in any number of ways to make sense of it. That's technically true. Propositions can be reordered in all kinds of random. You can put the word social injustice together, even though that can never convey information to another person that's stable. Like, they'll hear something in it, but what they hear will not be what another person hears, right? So it's not stable information. It's just random information, effectively. Right? You can say you're an agnostic atheist all day long. You can do that. And people will make sense of it, even though that does not make any sense. That's the problem. When you flip it over and you tell people, no, you're the master of the universe, what do you think decentralization is? Decentralization is, well, the power doesn't have to reside here. Power resides in all of us. That's what it is. And, I think, unfortunately, the success of the internet has destroyed our understanding of these things. Unfortunately, it's not a good thing for anybody. But that's basically, that's where we're at. That's what we're stuck with. For whatever reason, I think it's a bad reason, but for whatever reason, that's where we're at. So I think if you think about it that way, you suddenly realize, oh, they're just running away from judgment, right? Because if you just rearrange the story, the judgment that you have is different. And so of course, there's a connection between postmodernism and Marxism. That's where they got the idea from, because Marx came first, and they liked that idea because Marx's idea is effectively a trick. You don't need government. You don't need management. You don't need company owners. You can do without all of that. And the irony with Marx is capitalism is the thing that enables that. And that's the thing he wants to do away with. Of course, because he wants to control the state. You don't need government. I'll take care of it for you. That's the trick. Same with the postmoderns. You don't need the author. You can take care of that for the author, or if you'd like, here, let me show you how to do that. And then what interpretation are you going to prefer? That's the trick. They give you options, and they steer you towards one of them. It's the same thing that magicians do with card magic. It's the same thing.
Been ignoring this problem, the problem of narrative and how narrative shapes our vision.
Why is that a problem? See, saying that causes a problem because there's a narrative in this book called the Bible. I think he would know about that book. Why is that a problem? Because later, that's always going to be the solution for these people. I'm like, so then everything the postmodern said was absolutely wrong then. Oh, good to know. I don't know how they're dealing with this contradiction. It's a very strange contradiction. And I noticed it years ago, and I'm just like, oh. No, you have to admit one story is better than another because of the outcomes that context gives you, right? In other words, the closer to the context of reality you get, the better the reality you live in. Because otherwise you're fighting against reality, and so the reality you live in looks to you like it's wrong. Sure, the answer is start cooperating and participating instead of opposing and saying the author's dead or the author could be dead or who cares what the author has to say. Then the book makes more sense and can give you something good if it's a good book. If it's not a good book, it's a garbage book, like everything the postmoderns wrote, garbage.
What a conservative should be able to believe is that there are narratives that are more true than others, and that this is actually quite objective. And certain narratives yield certain results, and if you follow certain stories, then you come to certain,
So the starting point matters, and yeah, if you follow these stories, you're going to get these results. That's correct. That can be negative or positive. I don't know why Jonathan or anyone else thinks that conservatives don't know this and don't employ this. They do. They do. Usually conservatives, and this is an old trope, are very religious. It's almost like they think the best story is the one in the Bible. Why are we critiquing these people? They seem like the good guys. This is very strange. It's very, very, very strange, right? But also, then the postmoderns must be the bad guys. They can't be the good guys, right? So, like, where are we going with this? It sounds like we have our answer. Postmodernism bad, conservatism good. I don't know how you're going to come to a different conclusion here.
Conservatives have ignored the narrative problem they've in some ways been losing.
We haven't stated a narrative problem. Did you notice that? I did. There's no narrative problem stated here. And what he's describing is fundamentalism, right? The postmoderns are fundamentalists. They want everybody to follow the story the way they want the story to be followed, not the story the author wrote. Very strange. Well, that's fundamentalism. You really just want the words and you don't care how they correspond or allow you to participate with reality. That's super important. They're the bad guys. This isn't that hard.
Nonstop, because they are in a story that they don't totally understand, and they keep complaining and they keep whining about how they keep losing. But the reason is because
I've never heard a conservative complain or whine or think they were losing. I will tell you why. Online, there are no conservatives doing this kind of work. None. Zero. Zip. I went over this. I have a video about Lauren Southern, right, claiming that she was a conservative, and 0% conservative. 0%. Zero. There's nothing conservative about her story at all. I know conservatives. They wouldn't allow, like, conservatives are the ones that don't allow their daughters to go to dances. Conservatives are the ones that, don't allow TV 24/7 in the house. Conservatives are the ones with really strict rules. They're not the only ones with really strict rules, but they are the ones with really strict rules. The reason why they're not talking to people online is because they don't believe it works, and they're busy working and building stuff and making sure that things like the internet and all the electricity that it uses actually work. Those are conservatives. They don't have time for this sort of nonsense, because this is nonsense. As much as I love Jonathan-Pageau and I'm fine with Mary Harrington, having a conversation like this is pointless. You want no meaning. Who cares? You're going to get people feel heard. Well, somebody finally thinks the way I think. Well, you're a leftist. That's all. Fair enough. Like, okay, you're both leftists. I get it. You don't want to identify as leftists because the extreme left has gone completely insane. But you're not even moderates, actually. And you're as far from conservatives as you can get without being crazy left. Congratulations. I don't understand. Where is this complaint? Like, you notice they never mention anybody. They never mention, like, this person who is a conservative. Give me a list of your conservatives, please. I'd love to hear who you think they are. And then I'd love to look and see if any of them voted Democrat like last week. Because I bet they did. I bet they voted for Labour if they're in the UK. Like, I don't think any of the people that identify have a conservative inclination anywhere. They might identify a few moderates, and good, that's an upgrade. But those aren't conservatives. Conservatives never complain. In fact, I would say the hallmark of conservatism is people who don't complain explicitly, because they don't believe words move the world, which is why they're not online using words to try to move the world. Like see how consistent that is? Isn't that mysterious?
They don't understand that they're not setting the story. They're not the main character. They're just a character in someone else's story.
Yeah, I remember when I first encountered you. You mentioned Jacques Derrida, who, I mean, I had a fairly sort of recognizably, it was an eccentric classical education, but it was a classical education of a kind. And I left school, believing more or less that history happens in sequence, and and things are intelligible, sort of as they present themselves to sense. And words mean what they mean, and so on. And then I met Jacques Derrida and had I wouldn't say a full-on psychotic breakdown, but I went pretty crazy for a while.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not exaggerating.
Mm-hmm.
I was looking, in a sense, it was like simultaneously having an intense spiritual experience and being told that this experience is meaningless, which is so simultaneously very beautiful and also incredibly dark to go through that. To be.
Well, isn't that an interesting description? There's a fundamental contradiction there. That wasn't a hint that Derrida is bad, wrong, and evil? Because that would clue me in right away. Also, notice how she's opened up, right? This has now become very emotional and personal for her. And suddenly she seems a lot more human than she did in the beginning, which is great. I like to see that. That's good, right? Something you can relate to, who has struggles, who isn't all prim and proper, despite the accent. This is good, but also, like, really the fact that this like threw you into an existential crisis of some kind wasn't a hint that maybe this guy's a bad person and he's full of bleep, because that would be my first thought. Like, I don't. This is why I have a very hard time. This is why my YouTube channel is small. I have a very hard time understanding how people process these things, because every time I run across this sort of stuff all the time, and every time I run across it, I'm like, my first thought is, this person's insane. This is bad, wrong, and evil. Like, why did anybody listen to this? Right? That's my first thought. I don't have any thoughts beyond that. I dismiss it, because you should, because otherwise you'll have an existential crisis, and that's not good for you. It's not that hard. But yeah, starts sort of opening up. That should be the towel. Like, there's no goodness in postmodernism. Why are you traumatizing people? If it's traumatic, why would it also be good?
To have your eyes opened to, things hidden since the foundation of the modern world, really. And then also to be told pretty much in the same breath that this is all the hostile operation of power and exploitation. It was both amazingly beautiful and enlightening and just unbelievably dark. And I went properly kind of.
Oh, well, I'm sorry
loopy.
to hear that.
But
So again, like, those two things are mutually exclusive. Right? And if it's hidden, how did he find it? Right. So this is speculation, right? Because the only way you would know if it was manipulated and causing people harm is if you were on the outside or on the inside of the group doing it, right? If you were on the outside in some fashion or outside of the reader's sphere, right? So this is like the pattern of Gnosticism, is what she's describing. Oh, this hidden thing that gets revealed. And it's weird too, because at the same time, right, we already referenced C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis saw it. When was it hidden? When did this modernity thing start that caused this problem? I've discussed why modernity is a bad way to talk about this. It just is thoroughly unhelpful. Like, what's going on? Like, seriously, like, what's up? What's up with that? I don't know.
I honestly, I don't think I'm the only one.
Yeah.
I look around at some sort of young, passionate activist people, and I see what looks like the outer. It looks recognizable to me what they're going through, and I want to say to them, everything you're seeing isn't a malicious lie. It's all true. It's all right there. But this is not. There are other interpretations of what you're seeing.
Yeah.
I started out. My first attempt at recovering from that experience was in telling myself, well, if all of this is actually just the cynical operations of power, then perhaps I can just create my own truths and just invent the world as I want it to be, and perhaps I can just manifest that through sheer force of determination. And it sort of worked until it didn't.
Yeah.
See, so again, you recognize who did the psyop. Oh, Derrida did the psyop. That's it. He made up the fact that there was a psyop in order to psyop you into acting like a postmodern and trying to write your own narrative, which worked brilliantly. Like she just described it working on her. And it's inevitable. It's an inevitable pattern, right? So it's going to fall roughly into two camps, not only two camps, but mostly two camps. The people that go, aha, Derrida's brilliant. Now I understand. And they do what he did, follow him. And the people who can't and get despondent and become activists. Well, that's what she described. That happened. Like, there's no question that happened. PSYOP confirmed. PSYOP person Derrida confirmed. Postmodernism bad confirmed. Like, none of this is hard. Why are we making this hard? We should not make this hard. It does not have to be hard.
That's a long, painful, personal story. How all the ways I discovered that no, gravity still works the way it works.
That's right. Yeah,
the laws of physics, they're not entirely a social construct, right?
Yeah, that's right.
There is in fact a there.
Which means Derrida lied. Right. So why are we listening to somebody we can confirm lied? I don't like. This is what I understand. Okay, the guy lied. He made up a bunch of stuff that ain't true for sure. Why are we paying attention to him anymore? Oh, and also he psyop people reliably into one of two camps. Why are we even speaking his name? I don't know. I don't. Well, the postmoderns had a point. To be evil is the only point they seem to have had. Like, show me their point. By the way, I've been asking this question for decades. No one's ever given me an answer. A little weird. If there was one and all, you'd think they'd just whip it out. And they never do. Huh. Very, very odd. Very odd. It's coincidence, maybe.
And everybody knows that, really. No matter how much Derrida you read, most people don't follow that up with stepping off a 10-story building just to see if they can think their way into being able to fly. That doesn't actually, most people are sensible enough not actually to try that, and happily so was I. Here I still am. But then by a much longer and more painful, still more painful process of trial and error, I came to the conclusion that no, actually the solution is to say, okay, all the insights of the postmodernists are correct about this dimension of narrative and its development over time and the interaction of these complex dimensions of ideology and power and this is the symbolic dimension.
Yeah.
In all of its different facets, some more or less congenial to my personal goals. It's all there. It's all real. But it's not a construct. It's just real on its own terms. And in fact, I need to order myself to it rather than demanding that it order itself to me.
Yeah.
And in fact, that I just need. All it takes is that. It's almost no shift of perspective at all, but just to accept that there's a there, actually symbolically as well as physically.
Yeah.
Well, that's a weird way to go about it. She's not wrong, but also, these things are there and you can't order them arbitrarily because they already have an order. It's almost like there's a pre-existing created order. Weird. and then all we have the option to do is name it. I wish somebody had written that down in a book a couple thousand years ago. It might have saved us a lot of time. Honestly, guys, think you got to choose. It's Derrida or the Bible, right? You have to reject the Bible to embrace anything about postmodernism. And if you accept the Bible, you kind of have to reject all the postmodernism. Like, I don't see a way around this. And it's funny because the more they talk, the more that seems to have to be true. This is very strange unless that has to be true, because I wouldn't even call that necessarily the symbolic world. Maybe you could argue that the patterns, the ordered patterns that unfold, are in the same space as the symbolic world. I would call that the ethereal realm, just in secularese, if you will, because it's the best I can come up with, and maybe there's something better. I don't know. People don't seem willing to engage on this subject, so it's hard for me to get out of the framework that we came up with on the Awakening from Meaning Crisis servers so many years ago now, almost 6, more than 5.5 years ago. So sure, there's an ordering within that dimension, and there's also patterns, and it's not just, we'll say, merely the ordering of the symbols or something. That doesn't work. That's all very materialistic, right? Primarily physical, material cause centered, right? That's not the way it works either. So like, they're still stuck in the materialism here, which is strange.
It's not just that the laws of physics are there. In a sense, the symbolic dimension is just as real.
Yeah, there's a narrative. There's a true narrative reality and a true symbolic order.
And people can see it. Yeah. And actually, I can point to things that are happening in the symbolic world and say, no, that's a thing. And other people will be able to see it too.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, and it's.
And for sure, reading the postmoderns is actually useful. I see Derrida, I call him a prophet of the margin. That is, so much of the thinking that we have to deal with is really just World War II, post-World War II order.
That's right.
Kind of laying itself out. So the desire to...
To me, the most charitable read of all of that is that we're still working through the trauma response.
Yeah.
From the end of the industrial era, which was 1918 to 1945, in this conflagration, this sort of frenzy of hyperproduction in death machines. And then, that killed the flower of European humanity. And now we're still living in the ruins of that and trying to work out what happened.
So I don't know why they're talking about it like that. Why was the Industrial Revolution a death machine exactly? I mean, I'm not saying she's wrong. I'm saying where's the justification for this? How do you mean this? What do you mean trauma? Why? What did it traumatize and how? And would it be helpful to know? Because this is like PTSD. Like, oh, you know that you get trauma in Vietnam from bombs going off and seeing people blown apart. Oh, great, thanks. That's fantastic. Does that fix it? Or does just like exposure of walking outside with lots of support fix it, irrespective of whether or not you traced it back to its source? Because I think it's the latter and not the former. Not that the former isn't useful in some cases or something, but the latter works without the former. So I don't know, man. Why are we classifying this? Is it the industrialization, or is it the post-World War II consensus? Because those are different things, actually. If you've seen the history videos, which you should, a whole playlist, Adam's excellent, then you'd realize, oh, these are patterns that are playing out, and they have very little to do with industrialization and everything to do with what you place primary in the world, i.e., do you privilege certainty and propositions, or do you privilege something more like the wholeness of the created order? Really, you can just break it down that way. And if you want this certainty and this level of precision around propositions, then you're going to get no hierarchy and basically a flat world. because that's the only way to make it more precise and more accurate and more propositional, right? And to use propositions alone to wield the world, to have, quote, power or whatever. That's the only way. But then you have to throw out the wholeness and the created order. You have no choice. Created order is just huge. And so you can't propositionalize how it works. It's not possible. But that started basically with the Reformation. That didn't happen before that, and it took a long time to unfold, right? And behead the king and all that. But that's when the propositional tyranny really gets going, when you have propositions flying around everywhere.
And there is so one of the things that Derrida is trying to do is basically to call to uncertainty and to the undefined, or the ambiguous, you could say. And that's a real thing. And what I think the work we can do now is that the trickster and the gargoyle and the ambiguous is a part of the bigger story. And actually, a lot of the postmodern symbolism, the symbolism they use, is quite coherent. It's actually perfectly coherent. It's just that if you're able to pull away and notice, oh, this is the gargoyle that is making noise, and realize that, okay, so well, the gargoyle has a role to play as a kind of apotropaic structure. It's a kind of monster on the edge.
Can you pause for a moment and tell me what apotropaic means?
So apotropaic means that I
almost never come across a word I don't know.
Right.
But I don't know
never
this
heard that
one.
word? So
well, I've heard it, but I'm not sure what it means.
Yeah, so apotropaic means it's in some ways to use monstrosity as a function against monstrosity, right? So basically you use techniques that are related to the outside in order to...
Perseus with the Gorgon's head on his shield.
Yeah, in order to push away that which comes from the outside.
So the problem with this is that what Jonathan's describing is the world the conservatives create and have created, with things in the margin being excluded and kept in the margin. We had that. Derrida destroyed that. Right? And you can say, well, if you just, death of the author him, and then, quote, pull back out of his frame, out of his context. Does this sound familiar at all? No. Then you could see that the conservatives were right all along and we just didn't need to listen to Derrida. Yeah, well, if that's the conclusion, then yes, Derrida's garbage. I agree.
And so there, and it's very practical. There are all kinds of instantiations of it, and some are very political. It's like, well, if you're going to hire a militia, it's good to get them. If you can get the militia from your enemy, if you can convert the Normans, right, then the Normans will fight away the other Vikings because they're so close. They're just the reverse of the thing that's coming towards you. And so this is the idea of the monster and so the monster can.
So let's notice here, this is all false dichotomy binary framing, all of it. Why? I don't know. I don't understand this. Like you would think, right? And what's the solution? You had hierarchy, the binary framing goes away instantly, right? Because the binaries can exist at the same layer. Conflict can exist at the same layer and get resolved by the layer up, which sounds very Hegelian, although Hegel was just wrong about everything. It's really easy. And then you can start to realize, oh, it's all just triangles all the way down, and the triangle goes up and not along the horizontal. It goes up, right? That vertical causality, if you will, represented by the triangle usually. Weird, huh? It's very strange. Then you don't even need to deal with these problems, right? You could say, oh, you could defend your land with loyal people from your land, and then you don't have to hire mercenaries that are close to your enemy, because that doesn't even make any sense. And why would you want to do that? And then you're going to have two problems, right? Which is, well, we defended your land and now we're entitled to a piece of it, which would be technically true, by the way, whether you paid them or not. What are you doing? You're doubling down on the problem. You haven't solved anything. You're better off getting conquered by the Vikings.
It stands on the edge. Right, and this is actually something Derrida talks about the monster as the undefined and as the future kind of coming towards you. But one of the things that Derrida also wouldn't talk about is that there are two monsters. There's the monster that's coming towards you, and there's the one that is standing in the other direction. That is the gargoyle. So conservatives have to reintegrate the gargoyle to some extent. And they have done that. They have done it a little bit. And a lot of the shift that's happening, that happened from like 2015, 2016 up to now, some of it has been, let's say, reintegrating the gargoyle, or having gargoyles on our side. You know, it's like when Nicki Minaj says that she's a conservative, that's an apotropaic move, where you have someone that comes in and has all the signs of actually not being a conservative at all, but nonetheless standing as a wall and kind of throwing rocks in that direction.
Talking of
So again, this is all super, super binary. And you have to understand that saying things like the unambiguous is important or something is an identification against. If it's unambiguous, you can't define it. And if you are trying to embrace it, you're identifying against things you can define. So it's a tricky way of getting you to do identification against, which in all cases is actually evil. So don't do that. Identify for. I'm for these things that I know. Right? That allows you to be principled. If you identify against, you cannot be a principled person. Ever. Don't do that. Right? You don't have a principle because you've got any number of things that you could be identifying with, but you're refusing all of them. That's not good for you. You shouldn't do that. It's not good for everybody, actually. Please don't do that. I live here too.
As we've found ourselves conservatives and gargoyles, this feels actually like a beautiful entree into something which I wanted to ask you about. This is a line of thought. So one of the things I think about when I'm walking the dog, I think about all kinds of things when I'm walking the dog. And one thing, a thought that came to me fully formed the other day, I was wandering through the forest at sunrise, was why are memes always ugly?
Yeah.
Now, memes, it seems to me, are, they have a sort of gargoyle-like quality to them. Great, and most recently, and I think significantly and importantly, they've become part of the artillery of internet dissidents, most of whom are more associated with the right than the left.
Yeah.
I'm not sure conservative is quite the word that I would choose, but some sort of, if you like, a sort of radical force of challenge to a hegemonic liberal set of beliefs.
See, here we go again. So she's almost got it. Like, oh, there has to be a third group. Yeah, there has to be a third group. Has to be a third group, right? They're not conservative at all. All memes are not ugly, and they didn't start out ugly, right? They started out as regular cartoons. In fact, if you want to go birth of meme culture thing, this is an adaptation from basically nerd humor, right? Which is all your base are belong to us, which is a bad translation from a video game. This is very old. I go back to 2000, all right, something like that. It's very old, and at least in internet terms, it's very old. And then eventually, right? But like none of the memes around something like The Office, which I never watched the American version of, are ugly. They're not. I mean, a lot of them are beautiful people memes, and maybe she's referring specifically to Wojak or something, whatever. But this is what happens when people oversimplify and reduce things, we'll say scientifically, and they're not experts in them and they don't do their research, right? And I'm not claiming to be an expert at this at all myself, but also I was there for a lot of this stuff. So I kind of saw the differences, right? I made the meta meme, I don't know when it was, 2006 maybe, a long time ago, maybe 2008, I don't know. The Velociraptor is one of the original meme, static picture memes. So I already made that meme. I already made it. I saw all this. I saw all of it. It wasn't that hard. I wasn't the only one or anything. Like a lot of us who were pre-meme culture, from whom meme culture was stolen or exapted or copied or whatever, however you want to frame it. We knew what was going to happen because we weren't the low IQ kids on that block. Maybe everyone who came after is. I don't know what else to tell you. Memes are not a positive. I've got a whole video on this now. I've mentioned it before, but now I've got the sort of the evidence for how this works from a story and a narrative style perspective.
And one of its chosen weapons is the meme,
Yeah.
the internet memes, which are these sort of clusters of meaning, which emerge sometimes incredibly fast and very organically out of this sort of online soup of discussion and desire and formless and sometimes very chaotic and angry energy that ferments online. Actually, there's a recent example which came out of British political discourse. Was well, I mean, there was a a computer game that was created by a local authority in England to educate young people in not becoming radicalized to the far right. And it included, as one of the cartoon characters in this story that it told, a young woman who was radicalizing the main character in and sort of tempting the main character towards these forbidden worldviews and forbidden behaviors. And she was depicted as having a purple bob down to her shoulder and a black choker. And she was meant to be an aversive character, a repugnant character, and she was immediately embraced by this sort of turmoil of internet rightists as an icon. And she's since manifested online as sort of in a very strange way and incredibly fast, taking on a life of her own. Her name is Amelia. She has purple hair down to her shoulders. She always wears the same. She wears the same outfit. She has a cardigan in purple and a short dress in pink. She's emerged almost overnight as a kind of crowdsourced saint.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen that dynamic happen before, but never that fast and never that personified. And there's some. I don't know if you've observed.
I don't know that.
Okay. Wow. This is like record for the most misread thing ever, right? Obviously, no one on the right has purple hair. Conservatives don't have purple hair or blue hair, right? Obviously, they don't wear their hair funny, right? And so what happened was that symbol is wrong. It doesn't match reality, right? The people radicalizing people are always on the left and they always have purple or blue or green hair. Yeah, right. And maybe not always, but also pretty much always. And so the people who are skeptical and in the middle, and some of them are leftists, the rest are moderates, zero conservatives. They know this. Like everybody sees the pattern. We all see the pattern. Who's radical? Who's radicalizing? Who's running around on TikTok screaming at people? Is it pretty blondes dressed as farm girls? No, it's not. Weird. I wonder why. Right? It's purple-haired people. That's with silly haircuts and occasionally the left will try to psyop and say, well, we know what conservatives are. They are like this, and so they'll try to dress like them or something. But they usually leave their blue hair because it's part of their identity. Right? They're very tied up on self-identifying, and so once you realize that, they're just noticing the inconsistency and making fun of it. It's sarcastic. It's not that they're adopting it as a saint. It's that they're saying, look at how dumb these people are. They think we're going to fall for this. Everybody knows symbolically that this is the radicalizer and is a leftist or a leftist appearing to be on the right. Everybody knows this. Of course, that's what's going on there. It's not saint adoption. That's ridiculous.
The emergence of
but I understand
this is
the thing.
But you understand, and she's the first icon of that kind I've seen who isn't ugly. And this is a very long preamble to the thing that I was thinking about, which is if only memes weren't always ugly, was the thought I had while I was walking through the forest. And then I thought to myself, congratulations, Mary, you just invented religious icons. And I thought, I must speak to Jonathan about this. I must ask you what you think.
Well,
wow, no, amazing. And again, I have a video on this on the transformative coupling and why memes don't work and why they're not icons. And not all memes are ugly. And non-ugly memes don't work any differently than ugly memes, actually, because memes are memes and they're identifiable as memes and not icons because they work differently in this symbolic reality, if you want to put it that way, right? As created order. So like all the pieces are there. They've already talked about all the pieces, and they still get it wrong. Why? Because they're leftists. That's they're doomed. They're doomed to get it wrong.
In terms of the character you're describing, she is ugly, maybe not visually ugly, but she's ugly in the sense that we've talked about, which is that one of the things that has shifted political, especially since 2016, that has shifted the political discourse is the capacity for the right to understand how to use the tools of their enemy against them. And it's almost like am I going to expose this to like how it works? But if you remember, so a good example that's similar to what you're saying is the fetishization of American Psycho, which is the
Yes.
young, very young. I mean, I'm talking like I've known frighteningly 15, 16-year-old guys who take on the aesthetics of American Psycho. Nobody understands because, but the idea is exactly to take something that you're using to attack me like a judo move, and to turn it so that now I assume it and I turn it against you. If you understand that, a lot of the Groyper behavior will become way more coherent. People don't understand the Groypers because they have no capacity to understand that. Is to say, oh, you saying I'm racist. Well, you know what? I am.
Well, I think the assumption that this is a judo move is incorrect, right? American Psycho is all about psyops and what is reality. And so if you're adopting that, you're saying, I accept my role as being in the world that is constructed this way. It's just accepting the skepticism and embracing the skepticism because you realize there's no way around it. And I think the reason why these things happen, right, is because iconoclasm causes icons to look emergent. And emergent things are identifiable as icons because these emergent things that should be icons but don't rise to the occasion, I mean that almost exactly actually, have to exist. Like they're still there. They're still part of the world. So you're witnessing these things. They look like they're emerging only because we've denied the created order. And so it looks like everything's emergent. And if everything's emergent, you have no control over that, right? You didn't buy into the postmodernism because you weren't that dumb. And so you might as well just embrace American Psycho. And point out with Amelia, it's definitely a psyop. Somebody else is controlling the game here, which is why people aren't getting caught. And people who do horrible things are allowed to continue to do horrible things. And everyone just pretends like it's not happening. Yeah, well, that's the world they're living in. Why they're living in that world and where that world came from are better questions. But to think that they're like doing some kind of magical judo, this is just what happens when you get stuck in binary thinking. That's all. This is just you're in binary thinking. You don't have a good way to look at the world. So you look at the world as move and counter move, action and reaction. The world's not that. Flight or fight. It's flight, fight, or freeze, guys. In the case of the young kids, adopt the world that it looks like you live in. Just tell everybody you're aware. No, I know I'm living in an American Psycho world, so I'm just going to do that. Fair enough. I don't know what else you would do.
And then what are you going to do now? Did you see? I saw Fuentes recently. He said Epstein is super cool, and I was like, okay, but I get what he's always doing the same thing. He's saying Epstein is super cool. Now what? Now what do you do? Because I'm the chaos warrior. I'm a Viking berserk standing on the edge, and I am totally out of control. Now what are you going to do? How?
Or hey, Epstein kind of got away with it and no one cares. That is pretty cool. Like, I'm sorry, but if you can adopt criminal behavior and kind of get away with it and everybody knows, but no one's going to do anything, That's like, that's not a bad way to go, guys. I hate to break it to you, but also it's not a bad way to go. That's why you need to punish people, and you need to have the severest possible punishment options available, because otherwise you will always get this pattern. This is not unique in history. We have seen this behavior before, where everyone goes, hey, all the bad guys are getting away with it. It's super cool to be a bad guy because you can get away with this stuff. That's not faulty logic. That's perfectly reasonable, logical, coherent, consistent, and rational. It's not that hard. It's not a challenge. It's an observation of what this is the problem. When you kind of try to think that all these people who are just observing the world and telling the truth about their participation, about their experience, are actually playing 4D chess, like is implied here, you get a very weird view of the world. Totally unnecessary. I mean, I'd like to think that Nick Fuentes is not a genius. He's clearly not an idiot, and he's a good entertainer, but also that he's a perfectly rational human, because I've never seen him be irrational at all. I've seen him tell a lot of truths, though, a lot. And I've never seen anybody address the truths he tells. They attack him. Instead, right, they try to shoot the messenger, as it were, instead of just engaging with his points. And then, yeah, he embraces that, oh, all right, well, if you're going to attack me, I'm going to change. I'm going to chameleon myself. Well, that's the right move. I don't know what else to tell you. He's not that hard to figure out. He's just responding and reacting, using the tools everybody else is using. He's just a little bit more honest about it and a little bit better at it than they are. That's all. He's not a super genius, and he's not thinking this stuff through real hard because he doesn't have to. And in a way, he's embodying that. Look at this. I'm being attacked by the system. I'm one of the most demonetized persons on the internet, and I'm able to make a living on the internet. And I'm thumbing my nose at all of the things that you say are bad. And here's the reason why I don't think they're bad. And I'm using your scientific style methods and your standards of evidence and your logic and reason rationality and proving my point using your tools. And you refuse to engage with me using your tools. Yeah, well, you did that. I don't know why you did that. Kind of makes you look a little dumb, by the way. That's because you're a little dumb, right? He's embodied the thing that you showed him. That's all. That's not hard to do, by the way. That's natural. That's mimicry. That's Girard, the good part of Girard, the mimicry part. Yeah, okay. Not 4D chess. It's not him being cheeky or standing on the edge. That's not what's happening there. There's a much simpler explanation. Sorry, just way simpler.
Are you going to pass this wall? But that's a real technique of combat. Mm-hmm. So I think that's what a lot of meme culture is, very apotropaic. Mm-hmm. It's like, exactly, you need something really kind of ugly, misspelled, whatever, and you just use it as a chaos weapon.
Mm-hmm. The misspelling in memes is usually to denote a lack of intelligence. The ugliness in memes, and they're not all ugly, the Giga Chads are not ugly, like on purpose, right? Is to denote who's good and who's bad and why. And because when you're dealing with images in, we'll say, super large population sets that are, we'll say, unnatural or unhuman, you end up with a lot of ambiguity that can't be resolved at all. Sarcasm on the internet is almost impossible. Why? Because it's tonal. So unless you're doing voice, the sarcasm is very hard to get across to people. And memes have the same sort of limitation. It's not the medium is the message. It's the medium limits the message. Absolutely it does. If all you have is a wall of text and you don't even have, fancy text like HTML or Markdown or something, you don't have one of these ways of expressing bolds and italics and things like that, then the way you have to write, the level of detail you have to write in propositions to get across your point changes. It's the difference between good literature and okay literature and bad literature, is how well you can wield the language to get across the richness of the world or the picture that you're trying to paint. Memes have huge limitations. For example, if you show me a meme from The Office, I am not going to get out of it whatever you think is in it, because I don't like that show and I never watched it. I don't know these characters. It does not resonate with me, and therefore it cannot connect me to any other thing. It fails immediately, right? The meme authors kind of know that. And then also there's this cliquishness and this need to be in groups. Some people call that tribalism. They're totally wrong. There's a need to be in groups to survive, right? And so all of these private meme things pop up, just like they do in language, right? That's what things like ghetto speak was, right? Oh, I talk like I'm in the hood. Okay, fair enough. That was a thing. All the ghetto speak sounded the same, even in different cities for the most part, with very little variation. There's much less variation between, we'll say, people in similar city living conditions across the United States than there is in people in the same city with different living conditions. Right. The hierarchical distance is greater than the horizontal flat difference. Now you add the internet where you can find that out. In other words, you can find more of the flat level coherency. That's part of what's confusing everybody about this, right? The wealthy black person has way more in common with a wealthy white person than they do with a poor black person. They just do. Sorry. It's just the way it is, right? Hierarchy matters a lot. And when we don't account for that, we actually misread what memes are doing and how they work and what their purpose is. And, and when we try to put them in the framework that we have, instead of reading the framework that's already there, it's almost like we're being postmodern about it and calling for the death of the author already when the author's alive.
But there's also a sense in which it's not just apotropaic. It's not just about the judo of inversions, if you like. It's not just in a sense there are real symbolic currents flowing in there as well.
Yeah.
And I wondered what you thought about the idea that a meme which isn't ugly is bordering on the same territory as a religious icon.
Well, it depends. So I think that most true meme culture is usually it's averse to actual meaning. Usually what it is, it becomes a kind of substrate for meaning. That's what makes a meme very powerful, is that in some ways it's actually quite flexible. It has a lot of space inside of it, and therefore you can wield it in different directions. And so this is, and this is even outside of political memes, a lot of memes have that function. You see the face, you know what it's referring to, you add a line, and now you make it precise, right? You use it. And the relationship between the general concept that it's embodying and then the precise application is what makes it funny, is what makes it interesting. And so in some ways it is the very opposite of an icon or a religious icon, because the religious icon is truly the encounter of a person or of a personality that represents something real about the world directly to you and that you can encounter. So it's not that there's nothing I think that meme culture does have a religious aspect to it, but it's more like the meme magic that people talks about. It's more about affecting the world.
Perhaps
So wow, there's so much there. The difference between an icon and a meme is orientation. It's simple as, right? And also the constraint, so the ability. Memes are flat. Flat, right? They don't have any representation of depth. Icons have usually most icons are not flat. Some are, we'll say, painted icons or whatever. But even something carved is not flat, right? But if it's a painted icon, like the Orthodox love their little painted icons, there's a depth there, and that depth is expressed usually in both ways, but at least in one of two ways. Either the depth is done through the artwork itself, or it's expressed within the flat artwork as something physically higher. We'll say that's actually part of depth, or physically lower on the within the ordering of the objects of the icon. that depth cannot exist with memes. And the fact that memes often rely on propositions should tell you a lot about their constraints. And there's no such thing as meme culture. And if you actually studied memes or engaged with memes, even just a little bit, because I haven't done a deep dive on memes or anything, because it's kind of pointless, you would realize cultures have sets of memes that go with them, because culture is greater than meme. Meme is communication form, right? It's not, these things are not, spiritual powers emerging from the internet, which seems to be how they're being talked about here and elsewhere. These are just people trying to communicate using the restrictions of the medium that they're already stuck on. The medium that you're stuck on when you're talking about memes is a computer, and it's explicitly a two-dimensional, easy to transmit form of communication that causes the flattening. And then in order to re-inflate the meme and ground it at the same time, you have to use propositions on the meme. Sometimes it's just yes and no over buttons, right? Or it's 3 buttons, yes, no, maybe, or yes, no, and don't be stupid, or whatever. But that is more important to realize. Cultures have their own sets of memes. There's no such thing as meme culture. That makes no sense. The fact that there's a certain part of people that you see using them, and Jonathan's old enough to remember this. 4chan used to create all the memes pretty much, and now they don't. Interesting, right? And 4chan memes were not the same as everybody else's memes. When people created memes outside of 4chan, which always happened, they were not pointing to the same thing. And the 4chan people, if you studied this, actually regularly made fun of the other people's memes, and vice versa, right? They'd be like, oh, 4chan thinks this, and 4chan just usually, because 4chan were the elite, they called themselves, in computer parlance, in the hacking language, elite is a thing. You can watch the movie Hackers if you want for more info on that, right? This idea of elite, hierarchical, is still there. And sometimes it's, it got shortened to elite, which there's so much history there. I can't go into it here. There's so much history. And I was there for a good chunk of it. So these are actually important, right? Because that is the reinstantiation of the hierarchy in the internet, or on the internet, or within the nerd circles. However you want to frame it, all of those frames work pretty well enough that it gives you the flavor for what I'm saying about there's no such thing as meme culture. Memes are tools. They don't convey culture. Tools don't convey culture. Cultures may or may not adopt certain types of tools based on constraints, but most cultures will adopt any tool that will work for that culture once they come in contact with it. Memes are tools.
Better analogy then would be the commonplaces, the rhetorical topoi from the pre-modern world.
Yeah.
I mean, this is probably a field that I'm sure you're familiar with this as well. These were practices which were part of the art of the learned art of speech, which was inherited from classical civilization and was really practiced all the way up to the 19th century. At which point, the civilization of print became so dominant that it died away, along with Latin. But the rhetorical topoi are ways of thinking about the world.
Yeah.
And so greater than or less than, or there's a whole host of them. It is like this, is not like that. These are all they're standard formats for engaging with your speech material, which allow you to formulate your argument.
Yeah.
And in addition to that, in the early age of burgeoning mass literacy, people would collect commonplace books where they would excerpt quotes on themes which were interesting or useful, and people would build up incredibly rich portfolios of essentially snippets or clips, in a kind of copy and paste way that we would, very online people would find very familiar now. They'd sort of copy and paste by hand, obviously. Use handy quotes from people, and then produce, you go through your commonplace, but when you're writing a speech, what do I have on the well-ordered polis? And then you've got a whole bunch of quotes from authorities that you can kind of drop in. And these, so in a sense, these function, it's not an icon it's not an encounter with something which is sort of objectively present in the symbolic world, which is, as I understand it, what you're saying about a religious icon, so much as a sort of cluster of material. It's a common place,
Yeah.
and which you could be traveling through in a number of different directions.
It has. I mean, it does.
Yeah. So my conception of icons, the one that the group came up with years ago, was a proper icon has many roots in, and then brings you up, and then there's many exits out, and they're not all at the same height. If you want to think of it, terrible way to think about these things, just the best I can come up with, right? And for materialists and secularists, so that to me is the best way to think about these things. It's like, yeah, there's lots of affordances, to use some Vervaeke language, at the bottom, and there's lots of affordances for exit at the top. And the thing that the icon is affording, other than those entry and exit points, is transportation between them. That's an icon. Memes do not do that. Memes have single entry point, single exit point, and mostly their entry and exit points are not stable. And so people can read memes completely backwards from one another. Very easily, happens all the time, actually, because they're a poor substitute for what Mary Harrington was talking about earlier. So with that, I think we're more or less halfway through, a little bit less, I think. But I'm gonna have to leave it there because I'm tired and the video is super long. And I'm gonna finish this up. There's some better stuff coming up around egregores. It's gonna be interesting to see where we get to. And look, I really appreciate people sticking through with this. And do comment. Let me know what you think. If you found something I missed or didn't understand something in particular, I can comment on it. And look, thank you for your time, energy, and attention.